Hello, Year 6. How are you all doing? I hope you're doing well. This is a completely different subject we're going to be doing today in art. We're going to be doing looking at portraiture, and specifically, we're going to be doing a portrait of Winston Churchill, who I'm sure you all know. He was the second Prime Minister during World War II, came after Chamberlain. And he was a really charismatic, amazing character. So he was actually also an artist. So it would be lovely for you to do your own portrait of Winston Churchill and try and capture some of his character. Right, I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, so as I say, your objective for today's lesson is to do a portrait. And I've put on here, I'd like you to use thoughtful mark making to give texture into your portrait, but also to add tone and also to give contrast. So those are some words and some concepts I want you to think about initially. So I've got a few questions for you. What is portraiture? I'm sure you've all heard of it before, but have a think. If you were to give a definition of a portrait, what would that be? Do you know anything about portraiture and when it started or when it came about? Have a think now. The next thing I want you to think about is, why do you think I've talked about thoughtful mark making? Why is that important in art? Have a little think now. What do we mean by mark making? Next, I want you to have to think about texture. What does texture mean? And specifically, what about texture in art? And why do we have tone? What is tone used for? And then putting these all together, what is contrast, tonal contrast in art? Right, I hope you've had a really good think about that. Firstly, I'm going to talk to you a bit about portraiture. So you can see on this slide here that I've put a series of portraits going back from Egyptian time all the way to contemporary photography, including some wonderful ones here of Pablo Picasso, a cubist and fantastic artist. So portraiture goes back really to at least back as far as the Egyptian times, and it really flourished about 5,000 years ago, because you have to remember, before the invention of photography, painting or sculpture or drawing was the only way to actually record the appearance of someone. So imagine all those wonderful Egyptian pharaohs and very significant people. They wanted their image to be captured somehow. A self-portrait, which I'm sure you've heard of before, is, as it sounds, a portrait done by yourself. And I'm sure your time at Billingshurst, you have had an opportunity to do a self-portrait. Portraits really are more than just a record. They've been used throughout history to show power, importance, virtue, beauty, wealth, and any really qualities of the sitter, the person the portraiture is done of. So, as I say, we're going to be doing one about Winston Churchill. And I know you've never met him personally, and you're going to actually be using photographs to work from. I bet you'll be able to have an idea of what sort of character he was. I'm sure you've seen something of him before. So let's think about some of those art terms. Thoughtful mark making. Well, thoughtful mark making is what we do with drawing. As soon as you put a little dot or a mark of any sort, you are mark making. Now, it's very, very easy when you're doing portraiture and when you're doing art to do very careful, gentle outlines of things, which sometimes are really important. But often, if you really want to get somebody's character and emotion and mood and atmosphere, just like we have been doing in our shelter work, you want to use very interesting mark making to actually really engage the viewer and to sort of portray some of that drama and mood. Texture is just like in art, is the same as anything. It's either the physical texture, so a bumpy surface, a rough surface, a smooth surface, or it gives the impression of that texture. Because obviously when you're drawing, you're creating that illusion in art. You're trying to make something look bumpy or spiky or smooth or rough. And again, adding texture really adds mood and atmosphere. So some of the work I've seen of the shelter drawings, wanting to get that really dark, edgy, nervous atmosphere that they might have felt down during the Blitz in the underground. So you scratching, marking like that. And as I say, that really builds texture and emotion into your work. So I'd like you to consider that with this portrait. Tone is literally just a difference between lightness and darkness. You vary the tone to give an impression of space in 3 dimension. And we did that obviously when we did our potatoes, looking at the shadow, and also you're getting a curve form where the light comes in. So you can see if you looked at my face now, this would all be very, very light here on my face. I'm looking in the camera, and this would be much darker tone. And even with my arm here, the light's catching it here, it goes dark around there. And that gives the illusion of actually something being very 3-dimensional, but also in the background, everything gets further away from the viewer, gets darker and darker. And that builds this idea of this concept. It sort of tricks the brain to think that you're actually creating space, although you're working on a 2-dimensional surface. And then contrast is just really opposite elements. So you can have bright and dark. In colour, you could have different contrasting colours, which we've looked at before with our landscapes. And you can obviously have different textures. You can have a rough texture and a smooth texture. You have a very simple texture and then a very complex texture in art, and those are all very important. Now, the reason we use that is it gives your artwork balance and makes it again more interesting. Both tone and contrast, I always think a very simple way of achieving that is by slightly unfocusing your eyes, which I'm doing now, and that makes that contrast really, really obvious because you're blurring the lines and you can see the dark and the lights. And that's what I want you to do today. I want you to get some really dramatic contrast because again, it gives your artwork interest, balance, and mood. Okay, so before you actually do the portrait, I've got some exercises for you to do. I'm sure you've done this before, but it's always worth having a bit of a refresher. I'd like you to achieve a variety of tones and practice how to do that. As you see, I've put here, going from a very, very light, going to very, very dark. Now, you will know that at school that we've got a range of pencils going from H, which is very, very hard, through to 6B, which is lovely and soft. And those 6Bs, you can get some very, very dark tones. But if you don't have those pencils at home, not to worry, because you can simply do it. I used here 1 pencil. You can simply achieve that by how hard you press with your pencil. So to get the light tones, you do very, very gentle light marks, and you push harder and harder and harder to get those dark tones. And what I've done is I've actually put my pencil on the side, and then I've, rather than just on the ends, so you get a wider part of your pencil, of your chop, what's it called? Your lead, and as you press harder. Now, to get some of the light tones, I then got my eraser and started rubbing into that because that also lifts it just gently, and that's obviously a brilliant way, again, to get interesting marks. Then to get your dark tones, you can see it over here on the right, very, very dark tones. I then worked into it even more over and over with layers, and that will build up these dark tones. So first, just practice that. Practice getting different tones from the very light to the mid-tones and then the dark tones. After that, I want you to just spend maybe 3 or 4 minutes practicing some different mark making. I've chosen 6 here, and I think I'd quite like you to have a go at those 6. I've called the first one Squiggle, and I've literally got my pencil and I've gone round, round, around, around, around. Now, this gives you a lovely, soft, sort of interesting mark, but if the tighter you get and the more dense you get, the darker and more moody, and you get that contrast from the very, I've called it open here, through to the dense and dark. Then we've got our very familiar crosshatch, which everybody knows. You go in one direction, then you change to in the other. Now that is very interesting, always can be used, but it's interesting in work, again, in artwork, if you've got a variety of marks going, and that's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to have thoughtful, I want you to think about why you're using them and where you're using them, and I'd like you to vary them. Tiny little circles, lots of them over the top to get this dense impression, and then open here. Dots, even without circles, just little dots. Dashes here, different tone again. I've used thicker dots here. Now I've put down the side, look, think, draw. Look at the photograph that you're going to be doing of Winston Churchill and think, okay, how can I interpret those marks in the photograph into thoughtful marks of my own? Think what would work best. Have a look at the pictures, decide which you want to use, and then think before you actually do it. Just do a little planning in your head. beforehand. Okay, so those first exercises, tonal, shading, 1 minute, 2 minute max. Then the thoughtful mark making, maybe 6 minutes, 2 minutes on each. Don't need to spend any more time on that. That's just the build up and the preparation. So as I say, we're going to be looking at portraits of Winston Churchill, and I'm going to flick through the 3 that I've got here. The first one is him with his wonderful hat on, smoking his big fat cigar, which we know Winston Churchill loved. The next one here is he's doing his V for victory sign, which became a real symbol of Churchill. And here I've chosen this one because it's him looking very, very proud in his military attire, his fabulous great lapel, and the brim of his hat, these wonderful big buttons. There's lots of really interesting imagery for you to choose. So you just choose one of those. If you can print out the picture, I would try and do that. If you can't, don't worry, you can work from screen. Now, the other reason I've kept these black and white photos is because you can see that there's a lot of fantastic tonal contrast going on. You can see the black band here, which I've taken a close up here, the black band of this brim of his hat, these dark tones inside the brim, which shows you that the brim actually comes in and under and scoops round. There's lovely light catching it up there and this wonderful shape of his hat. Then the dark shadow underneath that the hat casts and the scrunching of his eyebrows. You can tell that this is a lovely soft texture here. And I also want you to consider the tones here of the background. The background isn't white. The whitest thing in this image is probably his shirt and this very smart handkerchief that was a sort of formal attire that gentlemen would wear in that time. So those are probably the whitest parts, but even there's some shade coming in. This will be a soft grey, and again, quite like the fact that the background here has got the darkness, which pulls, we've talked about structural pull, pulls your eye across there, and then the mid-tones here. And then this fabulous pattern of his checkered suit. It's a bit blurred in here because I've blown it up. You might want to use really interesting textures to get that design and pattern in there, make it really stand out. And then just be ambitious with his big fat cigar. Think of the different tones in there and his eyes. You can't see his eyeballs, but you can see the wrinkles of his face and his ears. And then this lovely spotted bow tie here, which he often wore. And the contrast of that, try and get some of those spots and the detail of the black bow tie and the white spots in his white shirt. So that's one option. The next option here looks like he's got the same bow tie on, in fact. But again, very dark black suit with his white handkerchief coming through his hands, which might be quite tricky to do, but don't worry, we're not looking for real accuracy. We're looking for an impression here. And then again, these lovely tones coming through in the background. I've made a snip of the background because they're all soft and blurred, and you might be able to use your thumb to rub in and get some really interesting marks there. I don't know, maybe you can get some water on and experiment with that. And then maybe you actually get the background in quite a lot with the side of your pencil, and then use a rubber to rub out some of these marks. Don't forget, you can always get your rubber not to rub out mistakes, we're not talking about here, but we're talking about use them to lighten areas to get it really bright and show that dynamic. Here you can see the light's obviously coming from this side, coming in like opposite to me, the light's coming in here, but with Winston Churchill is coming in here. So this side of his face is much lighter than the dark side there. Okay. And then finally, this fabulous composition of him looking very proud and very serious with this wonderful brim of his hat and the design of his insignia there, of which I've afraid I don't know which regiment he was attached to. This wonderful, huge lapel with the dark shadows coming through and the detail of the pocket, the buttons. Again, you can see the light up here and the shadow down there. Big, lovely curves of his shoulder. And I've put this close up because the buttons are a really nice feature, but also can you see this stipply effect, little dotty stipply effect of his coat. You might want to achieve that with some interesting marks and then get these really dark tones coming in here. And as I said before, do not forget the background. I don't want to see your portraits on a white background. Get blurred tree and get some mid-tones coming here. Now, these are your drawings. You do them in your style. Don't worry too much about the accuracy of the faces. But what I definitely want to see is this tonal contrast, thoughtful mark making, interesting detail coming into that. and I want to see the tones from light to dark. So there's loads of light to dark tones you can get in there. So that contrast I want to see, contrast between white and dark, light and mid-tones. Now, just to help you, I've put some examples here of other year sixes that they have done. Whoops, move that one away, didn't need to do that. Let's get myself a bit smaller. What they've done, which actually I think might help you, is that they've drawn over the photograph initially and put in some of the tones, just to help you get into your head what these marks and the shapes are. You can see they've done that here as well, and just sketched it out, had a little go first. They've actually done this with monoprint, but we will do that another time. And then you don't have to copy these. I want you to do your own thing. I would have liked them to have put backgrounds in, which they haven't done. But the reason I've kept them is because they've really captured some of the shapes. I haven't really got the darks or the tones there I'd like to see coming in for hat. But this one I particularly love because look at that jacket. I mean, it's just fantastic with his big cigar. You know that's Winston Churchill straight away. His big nose and that wonderful big sort of smiley mouth. I just particularly like the way the texture has really been brought out in this piece of work. So this may take you more than one session to do. You might need to take this into Flexible Friday, but enjoy it. Be brave, like we said in the last one. Be inventive with those marks and really, really go for it. Okay, as always, please send your work through. We absolutely love seeing it. You're all becoming fantastic budding artists. Have a great day.